So good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here this morning. Welcome to Taking HR to the Next Level to Automate or Outsource. My name is Sandy Morrow, and I will be your host today. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. The recording and the slides will be sent out later today. Oh, you can't hear me. I'm very sorry. I beeped and I could be heard. Oh, good. Okay. So if you can't hear me, if you would maybe just turn your audio on and off and see if you can catch me. And I will just give you a second there to catch up and see if you can figure out what's going on. Thank you for letting me know you could hear me. You know, these things can be tricky. Oh, great. Thank you. Okay, then we'll jump in here. So today is about automate or outsource. Today it's we're going to talk about the work that you're doing and what maybe you keep doing, what maybe should you stop doing. Are there opportunities to engage technology and to consider automation? How do we find the right partner? And then how do we also calculate the return on investment, organizational buy-in, and what is a project champion and why you might want one? So before we get started, I understand we can do polls. So I'm going to ask you just a quick question here. How much tactical work do we do each week? On percentage, what do you think? Yeah, just another second, couple seconds here. Let a few more people jump in. Great. So most of you are spot on. You said between 25 and 50%. And the reality is the majority of us, some days are worse than others, right? It's about 32%. That's about how much tactical work on average that people do. And the challenge with that, right, is depending on the role that you have, if your job is 100% tactical and your employees really don't contribute to the organizational strategy, then that's okay, because tactical work is necessary in every organization, and it's the backbone, right? It's the infrastructure of our organization. But if we have responsibilities to look at strategy and we spend a significant amount of our time focused on tactical work, we never get to the strategy. We never get to implement the cool stuff, we'll call it, things that actually drive the organization and push us forward. The other challenge that we have is, we're in a data dilemma. So HR has been tasked for the last several years, probably somewhere between 5 and 10 as the emergence of all this great technology. It's, we need to have technology. The first question is, how do we pay for it? And the second is, what are we going to do with it? So having data is one thing. Being able to use that data in our decision making, that's a whole different thing. So, some of the places that we really need data analytics is in and around recruitment. How effective is our efforts? Are we actually touching the right group that we want to touch? Are we making, are we getting out there the way that we need to? And then there's the professional development piece. Do we really know what people are doing? Do we really, do we know that our managers are actually training people and developing them and setting them up for success? On the performance management side, if you have a manual process, it's really difficult to compile the results, especially if there's a lot of narrative. How do we see themes? How do we see those opportunities? We have our demographic information. If you have a basic HRIS system, then you probably have your demographic information, the age, our EEO reporting requirements, things like that. But we also need our retention and turnover. Do we have regrettable turnover? How are we, going to change that? Are there patterns that are connected with our regrettable turnover? So as we kind of take a look around today, the question that, I'd like you to ask yourself is, what do I need? What's important to my organization? And then how can I change it? How can I move it from today's level to the next level? And how do I get organizational buy-in to do that? But I know many of you, just like I've always been, I need to do something. I got to figure this out, but I have no idea where to start. And a lot of my projects started out that way as well. So let's take a look. So a friend of mine loves to go shopping. And as a result, she got into really deep trouble with her credit card. So she went to this debt-free seminar, and for an hour, the speaker worked to condition everyone in the room to look at things in one of two ways. Do I need it, or would it be nice to have? So sometimes we have something and we absolutely love doing it, but is it really important, right? So we also have to ask ourselves, maybe I need it, maybe it's really important, but when do I need it? And how do I figure out how to make time in order to be able to get that? How do I free up resources in order to be able to get the things that I really need versus the things that, might just be nice to have? We also have to sell our ideas to others. So how do we involve, people? How do we define who needs to be involved? How do we even know who needs to be involved? Sometimes we just don't have the information that we need. And how do we get it? So we're going to talk a little bit about inefficiency. And, this is by no means, a criticism of anyone who's here on the call, because when we talk about inefficiency, it's really not always understanding how can we maximize the things that we want to maximize. How do we move things from using the best use of our time and the resources into the place that the organization really needs them to be? And sometimes when we have an efficiency, we have chaos that's connected with it too. And it could just be too many people are working on something, maybe nobody's working on it, and things are falling through the cracks. So how do we move from inefficiency to efficiency? And what happens if we don't? So the repercussions to inefficiency, we may have wasted opportunities. We might be working on low priority tasks and projects, and perhaps our time could be spent better elsewhere. Sometimes we have really slow information. We can't make decisions timely. Maybe we've got duplication of work going on. I know when I've gone through some of the exercises I'm going to share with you with my team, I was amazed to find out I had 3 people working on the exact same thing and nobody knew it. And then how do we, move ourselves from that tactical to that strategic work so that we can really drive business change? So when we take a look at our time, we actually have the opportunity to change it, right? So what gets measured might get, you kind of get a better picture. So can we put our hard and soft costs onto efficiency? Like, can we figure out, what does it really cost to do this? Sometimes it's way more expensive to do something than we actually thought it was. How can we reduce or eliminate them? How do we make time for our strategic projects? And then there's always the employee experience. How do we elevate the employee experience? When we have the opportunity to move people from a tactical role into a strategic role, or even if it's a project-based thing that doesn't last very long, we really create engagement with our employees and we get to see how they might shine. And how do we do that? And how do we kind of, figure that out? So just so we're all on the same page, strategic work is thoughtful actions taken towards long-term goals that change the business for the better. And tactical work are the actions that you take to support the infrastructure of the company. And as an example of that, so I'll use payroll just because everybody knows payroll, right? So when we talk about the infrastructure of tactical work of payroll, we talk about weekly processing the payroll, we do direct deposit, we might have data entry into a third party, could be creating spreadsheets for our finance department to do our general ledger. A strategic project around payroll would be going out and finding a new payroll system, automating it, maybe going from paper timesheets to auto data entry, or from our employees, whether it's, time swipes at a time clock or, whatever that might look like. But then there's also these opportunities to automate some of those manual things that we do, like, data entry into another file, perhaps into your 401k, updating your insurance providers or your broker into their system. And these systems that are disconnected, which makes it, kind of hard when we're kind of looking at things and we're trying to pull the data together. When we're looking at too many different things, it's like, how do we do that, and how inefficient we might be. So I had a really small budget in my organization. And the reason it was small was because it was peanut buttered out through the organization, and it was spread out over, the whole company. And when things are spread out over the whole company into the departments for the department charges, really hard to kind of bring that data back in together, especially if there's, limitations in your security rights. So having data all in one place, visibility into what we're doing, it helps us to make some of the decisions. So getting hold of the information, that's the first hurdle. And there's a real simple way that we can find a way to do that. So how do we get started? So this is one of the simple spreadsheets that I used to use with my teams, and have shared this with other members as well, that we put down the task. And we just, kind of keep track for a couple of weeks, maybe over a 2-week period of time. Maybe ask someone on your team to do it, and maybe ask other people who actually touch the HR processes to do the same for you. So over a couple of weeks, we write down the task. Who does it? Meaning, who owns it? And then the question is, who is it for? Who is the recipient of the information? Sometimes we don't know. We put this report out, we send it out to 15 different people, and we don't really know where it goes from there. How much time does it take to do the task? So sometimes this is really difficult to quantify. Maybe over a weekly basis, we might spend 3 or 4 hours on something, and it's kind of up and down. Maybe it's only a couple times a month. So being able to put some time to it really helps. And then we have to ask ourselves, is it a tactical thing or is it a strategic thing? Is it part of the infrastructure of our organization? Is it necessary to keep things going? Or is it, more strategic driven, and it might be more project driven, and that's why we're working on it. And then it'll become tactical in the maintenance mode after that. And then how do we do it? So when we talk about manual work, whether it's something that's handwritten or it's in a spreadsheet or a Word document, those are manual things. Now, sometimes Excel, and we're going to talk about Excel in a minute, can really be the answer to what we're trying to do because of all the formulas and things like that. But, if it's not bringing you good value, if you're entering things over and over again, we need to put that in the manual column. And then what is the value? So on a scale of 1 to 5, or whatever rating system you're comfortable with, 1 meaning, not feeling it, right? This is something, we're doing it, and I'm not really sure why we're doing it. And 5 means, wow, this really helps the organization. A lot of people use this, or it's a key thing that we provide. It's a key service that we provide. And then we want to ask ourselves, we need to take a good look at this, right? So we'll call it assess. We need to stop doing this. Nobody cares. I do it every week. Nobody ever says anything. Nobody ever gives me any feedback. And it's really difficult for me. So I want to stop doing this. And then continue is, yep, it's part of the backbone of the organization. We're working on this. It's bringing value. And that's what we want to do. There's an opportunity column. And this is a wide open category for you. So when you think there might be an opportunity, you can either just put an X here, or you can make some notes in the opportunity column as to what is it that you think the opportunity is. So I think we can move this from manual to outsource. I think we can automate this. I think somebody else should take this. It's better suited to be in another organization. Or, you know what? There's no opportunity here. We're just kind of stuck with this, and this is what we're going to keep doing because it's necessary for the organization. The feedback column we're going to use later on. So your next steps after kind of doing this broad assessment is to meet with your stakeholders, and those are the people are in the who is this for column. And the question you want to ask them is, what do you think about my assessment? So I provide this report for you every 2 weeks. I don't find, it's a difficult report. I don't understand why I do it. What do you think about that? Tell me what you do with this report. I think we should stop doing it. What do you think? And get their buy-in. So if you want to make the case for stop, we can make the case for stop, but make sure the stakeholder knows that you're going to stop doing that. And then we think about it. Wow, that freed up some time for me, right? If you have things in your task column that you want to continue, make sure your stakeholder also sees the value in you continuing it. Doing work for work's sake does not help the organization. So just because we've always done it doesn't mean we should always do it, right? So now we've got the good conversation with our stakeholder. And the other question you want to ask them is there anybody else that you think is affected by this? Because if the report gets shared off with somebody else, or they know that somebody else is using it to feed into something else, then we know that, right? We want to make sure that if we're concerned about continuing something, then we want to make sure that we don't hurt somebody down the road or stopping them, right? On the assess side, get your stakeholder to give you some feedback. I'm thinking this might not be important. What do you think? Or I'm thinking this is really valuable. What do you think? It's a great way to build our relationships. So now we're going to go back to that spreadsheet that we had, right? So we're looking at capturing the feedback from your stakeholders. So go into your spreadsheet and then type into the column the feedback, who gave it to you, when they gave it to you, and what was their comments. And after you kind of compile the feedback, especially if there's more than one stakeholder, now you're going to go back and look at the value, right? You want to reassess that value rating. Because if you had it as a 5 and your stakeholders have rated it, have kind of told you, what, this doesn't mean anything to me anymore, then the value of that task is going to drop considerably for you. So when we think about our project champions as well, who are they? So when we get through assessing all of our tasks again, so now we've met with all our stakeholders, we're probably a month down the road, maybe or so. Now you're going to take a look at your tasks and say, what do I really want to work on? And bring your team in, bring your stakeholders back together if you like, and say, I think we want to pull a project together, and here's what I'm thinking about doing. And when we do that, we've got early buy-in. We also want to make sure we have a champion. So regardless of what level you are in the organization, your senior manager should be your champion at the very least. You want to make sure that your senior champion knows what you're working on, but they also can provide buy-in and also really start to support your project. Oftentimes we need budget to do things. Sometimes it's an organizational change. And without buy-in from other people, we're going to have a really difficult time making things happen, right? And that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to make things happen. So one of the ways that we can quantify what we want to do, we take our task and say, okay, this is the project that I think is really valuable to the company. So now I'm going to put a project plan together. And this is a really simple one. So there's some amazing tools out there that you can use to project plan build. If you don't have any tools, I use this repeatedly. And I find it really valuable for me because it's easy to manipulate. I can sort, I can make changes, I can do all kinds of things. So I love Excel for this purpose. So we put our task down and then we have to ask ourselves, who's going to own it? So be really careful you don't own everything. I tend to make projects and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to own it. I'm going to own it. And the next thing I know, I have so many projects on my plate that I can't possibly get to them. So when we think about our teams, we think about other resources that we might have, who is the best person to own this? When it comes to IT projects, perhaps, automating, we need to be careful not to push the responsibility onto our IT staff. They're great resources, but when it comes to owning software within the HR department, HR really should own their software. They should own being the subject matter expert, and they should also own making sure that it's functioning the way that it should be and providing support for those that use it. How much time is this project going to take? Sometimes it's not a big deal. We can get something done in a couple of weeks and we can really make a difference. And then other times we have these very long drawn out projects because we have people involved. We have to do some research and some homework. So try to be realistic on what you think. That I think, this is 3 to 6 months. This is 6 months or more. This might be a 2-year project. When would you like to start? So thinking about the resources that you have, do you have the resources to even begin to do this? And if you don't, how are you going to get them? If you're going to need additional resources, perhaps that's a temporary resource or a project manager that you can hire in the short term if you have the resources to do so. And then what are our people resources? Who do you need to be on the project? And then what are our other resources? So there might be some other things in the organization. There might be other software that's going to come into play, other resources that you might need. You might need, if you're doing a healthcare project, you might need your broker, whatever that might look like. And then cost. So what's kind of the guesstimate of what you think this is going to cost? And this is just your first level pass on your project. Sometimes we do a little homework off on the internet and we go, wow, I had no idea that was so expensive, or wow, I thought that was going to be really expensive and it's really not. So we want to make sure that we align, right? And that we know what we're going after and we know what we want to do. And then there's the last column. So ROI, return on investment, and then goal alignment. Sometimes goal alignment is how we get buy-in from our organization. So if your organization has organizational goals, especially top-line organizational goals, a project that you want to work on should align somewhere with your organizational goals. If you have departmental goals, they should align inside of your departmental goals. Unless it's something that comes up out of the blue, and that happens, where we just have this kind of project that just pops up from somewhere. And we just need to define it and figure out how to do it. And it really doesn't align with anything at the time, but it's something we have to do because of a change in circumstance. So let's talk about ROI, because this is organizational speak. ROI can be really tricky, and sometimes it's hard to define the value of our project. So sometimes we have to just go looking for it. There's two kinds of ROI. There's cost avoidance, meaning sidestepping a cost or not incurring it at all. And then there's cost savings, which are reducing actual costs of completing work. So sometimes your organization, I've been in organizations where they didn't want to hear about cost avoidance. We didn't get credit for cost avoidance, but we got lots of credit for cost savings as part of our goals and part of our bonus program. So when we sidestep a cost, it's things like not hiring someone or not backfilling, and perhaps trading technology for people. So how does that work and what does that look like? Sometimes we stop non-value added work and nobody feels it except the HR department. So if I'm working on a report, it takes me 5 hours a week, my stakeholder says, I don't use that report anymore. We did something different. You're like, wow, I wish I'd known. Now I just bought 5 hours back in my week. Well, if I'm salaried, that time just gets absorbed, right? And nobody really knows it except me. So that is cost avoidance, because we stopped doing something that was not value added. And that's something you should capture. That's something that you talk about at your performance review. We might have a new or reoccurring cost. So sometimes we need to cancel something no one is using. We had subscriptions to some employer services, and not E&E, by the way. We loved E&E, but we had these subscriptions and we were never using them. We spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars over several people. Sometimes it was, we had training that we subscribed to training modules. Nobody was using them. Why? Somebody asked for it. We went and got it. And you know what? It didn't bring the value that we thought it did. It didn't have the marketing program around it that it should have had. So, we stopped things. And sometimes when you turn something off and nobody asks about it, then it really wasn't adding any value. And then we'll go back to that shopping example, right? Is it necessary or is it just nice to have? And depending on where your organization sits, necessary are things that we have to spend time on. And nice to have might be a way for the organization to not only save money, but if things are constrained in your organization and you're looking for that opportunity, then this could be a nice way to contribute to your organization. No amount is too small. I worked for small organizations and I worked for very large organizations. There were times I came up with savings of a couple $1,000s here and a couple $1,000s there. And it looked like nothing in comparison to the $250,000 operation project that somebody had. But to be honest with you, remember the old saying, save your pennies and the dollars will take care of themselves. So similar to maybe signing up for that, Starbucks subscription, and you never stop at Starbucks because they took the store out, or you never have time to swing through that free coffee every month. You know what? It didn't bring any value to you. So what can we look at in our organization, and how can we kind of take a look at that? So here's an example of an ROI. So let's assume that you have two people at $30 an hour apiece for 20 hours a week, and they're working on something. So it's about $800 a week. That's the investment that you're making. And it happens for 20 weeks out of the year. So every other week or so, this project happens. This is costing your department $16,000. If you could find an outsourcing partner who could do it for $8,000, it would actually save you $8,000, give or take, right? Your break even is at 10 weeks, right? Halfway through that, having that outsourced partner, this is where those savings come in. However, you also need to repurpose those two people, right? So those 40 hours across those two people have to be put in somewhere else that adds value to the organization. And now maybe you're doing something that you couldn't do before. Maybe it's an elevated project that you couldn't get to before. So, and it doesn't mean you necessarily have to eliminate people. We look for outsourcing partners when we can't do something for ourselves. And there's something behind that, right? I can't do it. I can't get to it. It doesn't add any value to us. So I'm going to look for somebody to give it to. So what do you do when there's no ROI? And sometimes this happens. How do you find a way to get your project done when there is no ROI? So when we look forward, sometimes we have a project that's kind of way out there, and perhaps it's part of a growth process. So the organization is going to grow. We need to add 20 people in 3 years, but we need to prep everything now. We need to create an infrastructure in order to be able to grow those 20 people, or maybe it's more. Maybe you're in an acquisition or a merger or something like that. Hard to define those ROIs, right? So maybe it's maybe it's new hire avoidance, maybe it's resource alignments. It could be capacity, opening up capacity. But we also want to talk about burnout. And the reason we want to talk about burnout is because it costs between $125 and $190 million a year in healthcare costs with our employees burning out. So if you know that you have people that are working way too many hours, way too hard, when you start talking about 50, 60, 70 hours routinely for the staff that you have, whether it's on your team or it's on another team, you want to put this number out there to your organization to say, I know, this is not a hard cost, right? This is felt in the cost of our healthcare. This is, felt elsewhere, but it's also about retention of our employees. And it's about balance and making sure our employees are safe to be at work with us. So if you can't find an ROI, think about the impact of doing something which may be more intangible in your organization. And don't hesitate to use this statistic, which came out of Forbes in May of 2019. Think about what it is now. This is pre-pandemic. What must it be like now? And they're having a very, very difficult time defining what that looks like. So what's the difference between automation and outsourcing? The reason for this seminar to begin with. So automation streamlines a task to limit or eliminate the need for human intervention. It doesn't take human intervention off the table altogether, but it definitely changes the dynamic. BPA is a new term that's out there, and it's called business process automation. And this is where we take things that are presently manual and we move them into an automated state. If you work in manufacturing, we hear a lot about automation. When you think about it, you think about robots taking the place of people or maybe speeding up things. But, it's hard to imagine that when it comes to tasks that are office driven. So, in the beginning, calculators replaced doing math by hand. Or it could be something as sophisticated as chatbots that are going up now, right? So they're out there. You type into the chat, you're looking for something in customer service, and boom, all of a sudden you have the answer. And we know ChatGPT is out there too. These are amazing, amazing tools, and they learn and they keep learning, and they learn way faster than we can. When we talk about outsourcing, it's moving a task from inside of your organization to a partner or an external resource that will manage the task. So something like, we'll go back to that payroll example. If we automate, We find a payroll software that mitigates our paper timesheets. Maybe it automates them, processes our payroll. So you're not actually looking at timesheets anymore. You're looking for exceptions. You run reports across that versus having it manual when it's in paper form. We can also outsource our payroll. So we automate and have a partner such as ADP or CheckWriters or Paylocity. When we outsource, we're looking at things like PEOs, preferred employer organizations, where we don't touch payroll anymore. They collect the timesheets, they actually process our payroll, they run it through all, right through direct deposit. They may even manage the interfaces with our carriers. That is an outsourcing project. So the difference between automate and outsource is who is doing the work and where is the software? Where does it sit? So how do we decide what we can and can't do, right? So there's a few things here on this checklist that you might want to consider. If something is a core competency of your organization, or it's a key service that you provide, you need to keep it in-house. I'll use EA&E as an example. Our core responsibility is servicing our members and providing that HR service, the partnerships, the hotline. We can't outsource that. That's what we do. That is our core competency. So we're never going to outsource that. Do we have opportunity to automate? Yes, sometimes we do. We could have a database that helps to support us instead of manually looking things up. We could have a variety of things. We could have chatbot on our helpline, right? Doing, maybe automating some of the easier questions that maybe our members have. But our core competency and our sweet spot is servicing our members. And it's a number one priority for us. So we would never give that away. If the information is proprietary, you may need to keep it in-house. If it's the secret sauce of your company, very difficult to outsource that without a lot of risk. If you can automate it, perhaps. And then if there's a training or upskilling opportunity. So sometimes we outsource something and we actually stop career paths. And when we do that, we really limit our organization. So we want to make sure that we're very careful when we start talking about outsourcing work. Is it going to hurt the internal infrastructure of our organization? So things we should outsource or consider or outsourcing, things that cause us risk, things that have a lot of liability to them. Outsourcing partners, your health insurance, third-party administrators, COBRA work, perhaps leave of absence work. Those are great opportunities. Our legal, right? Do we want to bring legal expertise in-house? Well, we want to be well informed and we want to know when we might have, the opportunity to have a legal risk. So we're, our ears are open and we might have some training there and some experience. But when it comes to the hardcore, we're in trouble legal stuff, we want to make sure we have a good legal partner. If we don't have the day-to-day resources, so sometime, and I'll use a marketing company, perhaps a marketing company doing graphic work for its clients. Sometimes we can't find the resource, or we have these intermittent project work that might be temporary, then that might be an opportunity to outsource to somebody else. If it's far outside of your core competency, just the opposite of, the core competency of what we do. And then could it be more efficient or more effective if somebody else does it? So sometimes the expertise just belongs somewhere else. And no matter how hard we try, we're just not going to bring it in-house. Or our capital requirements are too high. So when it doesn't make sense, when the ROI doesn't make sense, or perhaps, it's just really, really expensive. So let's find a partner that actually already has that, and we can partner with them. And now we find ourselves in a much better position because we can work together. So that's how that comes together. But before we go outside, let's take a look in-house. So do we already own it, or does somebody else already have this skill? I had a project that I was working on and I was so excited. I thought I found the best partner in the world. And, I did all my homework. I did everything except get stakeholder buy-in. And I happened to be sitting in a meeting and I was listening to some of my colleagues talking and they kept using this word and I had no idea what they were talking about. And I finally turned to them and I said, "What are you guys talking about?" And they said, "Oh, the software that we use in our department." I said, "Really? What is that?" So they told me about it. I said, "What does it do?" they start talking about all these great features and how it can expand. And one of them turns to me and goes, you know what? The HR department should take a look at this. And I'm like, duh, right? So I didn't have any idea that it was going on. And ironically, neither did my IT department, because that department had the authority and the budget to purchase the software themselves. And it was a rather simple implementation. So they just did it and they put it in place. And I'm like, wow, talk about working in a vacuum. So I did. I looked into it, right? And it turned out it was just as good as the stuff that I was looking at, and we already owned it. We just needed to add some licenses. Plus, internally, I had people who actually knew, the software pretty well. And that was really cool, because what it did was it let me, lean on them through the things that I was looking for. Sometimes we can train somebody to do it. I'll talk about the Excel documentation. So, sometimes Excel, if you train somebody up on Excel and they learn how to do things that are more advanced, over 1 billion people use Excel worldwide. That's 1 in 8 people across the world. But statistically, only 30% of people actually get Excel training. And a lot of it is tribal. The other day I needed something. I was in the office working with one of my colleagues. And I said, oh, could you do this for me on the, on that spreadsheet? And then could you print it? And the comment was, oh, I don't know how to do that. To me, it was a really simple task, because I use it quite a bit and I've been trained, but this person hadn't been trained in Excel. So can we elevate somebody's skills on something we already own? And then, is there a job enhancement opportunity? So we might have a project. We might have somebody who really is looking for something cool to do, and they have the bandwidth. So can we bring them in? And is there a way that we can kind of use what we have before we start looking outside? And then there's always the case, right? We don't have we don't have any in-house resources. So we want to ask our network, and we want to do some online research. And when it comes to finding an automation partner or an outsourcing partner, homework and your network is the best way to do that. So when you think about your network, whether it's, professional association groups or just people that you've worked with in the past, not a bad idea to ask them. One of the most common conversations that I hear is, who's your payroll provider and what do you think of them? And you usually get I love them. Ooh, God, we got to change, right? So whatever that might look like, get other people's opinions, and then also ask them when. So sometimes we might have had an experience with a software provider or an outsourcing partner, and it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Well, what's happened since then? They might have realigned. They might have new resources themselves, and they might actually be a good partner, especially if they're inside of your footprint. So talking to your network really helps you to get the best information that you can possibly get. And if you don't have anybody, please don't hesitate to give us a call. Next step, we want to develop a request for proposal. So within the request for proposal, these are the key elements of an RFP. You can Google these and take a look, to see, what a good one looks like. But they usually have an executive summary. It talks about your company values, but it also talks about why this project is important to you. So it's kind of an opening statement. If you were to run into somebody at a networking event and say, oh, I'm looking for a payroll partner, or I'm looking for an HRIS system, what would you say? And it's kind of that, elevator speech. Why you're a good partner. So organizations need to know why it's important to work with you. You don't want to send out an RFP to a bunch of people and they're like, I have no idea who you are, and I have no idea if you're going to be a good partner to us, because everyone has limited resources and they want to make the best investments of their time. Why we're doing this project. Defining the reason for the project started way back when you were talking about the task list and you put your project plan together. What value is it bringing? We want to do this project because, and that solves your problem. And then what is the scope of work and the deliverables? So in and around scope of work, we expect A, B, C, D, E, and F from you. We want to do phase 1 in the first quarter of 2024, phase 2 quarter 2024, whatever that looks like, so that there's an expectation, so that the people that you're talking to about the RFP can actually decide internally if they can support you. And then what do you expect in the quote? So sometimes you send out an RFP and they send back an email and say, okay, I'll do this project for $18,000. And you're like, okay. And what does that look like? So key parts of a quote to be included can be things like, what are your internal resources and what is going to be applied to them? Some organizations actually say, this is a project and you're going to have 3 project managers and a senior project developer, or this is what this looks like, or included in the RFP is the cost of using our software, or that's an add-on cost. Whatever that might look like, you want to be very clear so that you don't have any troubles down the road when you start to evaluate. And then what's your budget? So this is often up for debate. Do you put the budget on the RFP or don't you? And if you do, it's a way to take people out of contention that just have no interest in working inside of your budget. So if you have $20,000 and they think this is a $50,000 project, then you don't want to be having that conversation because you're so far apart. The other thing is to leave the budget open and just say, please provide us with your best quote. And then your next steps. So we're back to the senior level champion. Who is your senior level champion? Do you have their buy-in, or are you working in a vacuum? If you've been working in a vacuum, make sure you tie in that senior level champion. Who are your key stakeholders? Who's going to be the recipient of the software or the service, the outsourced partner or the automation that you're going to implement? You want to make sure your stakeholders are on board. Nothing worse than you get into a project and you have a stakeholder who is blocking you. And I've been there. And we always need other people, right? So I've invited people to be on projects that I wasn't, so keen on. I didn't sometimes, if I felt like I didn't have control over my project, or they were kind of naysayers, but I had no choice. They needed to be included because they were key recipients of the work. And sometimes I just wanted to throw my hands up in the air and say, forget it, I'm not doing this. This is just too hard. But honestly, these were the times in my career when I learned the most. How about being incredibly thorough? And oftentimes the person who was kind of giving me a hard time was because I wasn't clear on the expectations and I wasn't setting the things the way that I needed to be. And I needed to work harder. And we know nobody likes to, be made to work harder than they already are. But it's, it really helped me from a career perspective. So I grew a lot during those times. You want to make sure the key relationships that you have them. And again, your senior level champion is the one who's going to help you remove roadblocks, especially if we need money. And then there's subject matter experts. So in the case of automation, you want to make sure that you have an IT resource inside of your organization, if you have one, who's a subject matter expert on what you need from an IT perspective. So perhaps it's connectivity. It's making sure things are inside or outside of your firewall, whatever that might look like in your organization. Have your subject matter experts on hand. One of the automation projects that I put in place, which was really challenging, was to do a training. It was to get training underneath. So we needed training software. We needed training tracking software. And part of the subject matter expert that I needed was the person who was in our manufacturing plant who was actually doing the training, because the software that we put in place needed to be good for her. And it was really eye-opening what she was going through on a daily basis. I knew we needed to do it. I wanted it for reporting, but she really needed it as a tool to make her life better. So then, we got our champions and our stakeholders. We refine our project plan with them. We have a project kickoff meeting. What are the responsibilities of the people on the team? When are things going to be done? And who is going to do them? There's no point of having people on the team if they have no deliverable. Sometimes people are upfront in the first phase of a project, and their job and their responsibility is to be part of the selection committee, and then maybe part of the testers, right? Before you go live with your new software, or they're just listening in on meetings as we start to go through that outsourcing arrangement. But you want to make sure that people have a role. Otherwise, they don't feel valued and they feel like they're kind of wasting their time. Make sure everybody's bought into the project plan, the timeline. Ask, do you have constraints that'll keep you from meeting this? When they think about all the other things on their plate, maybe somebody needs to drop off your project team and somebody else should come on. What does the selection criteria look like? So you're going to get that RFP out there and you're going to start asking for quotes. But as they come in, how do you evaluate them? Put together a little grid. We want this, 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 and this. This is what's important to us. And then we can start to evaluate. So your quotes start coming in, right? You want to reflect, rethink, and revise. There's always a chance to stop a project if it's not going well. So is your champion comfortable? Is this still needed? Sometimes we have things that drag on for 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And when we look back, we say, wow, we needed this back in January, but we don't need it now. And we don't know that. So we want to make sure, are we still looking at the right partners? Do we have the right people on the team for evaluation? Is there risk with what we're doing? Has that risk changed? And then how is the budget? How is your budget? If your company has hit some constraints, when you go to ask for the money, you're not going to have it. And I ran into that with a couple of projects. We were looking to automate something. We were far down the road, actually went into the meeting to get the buy-in from our CFO. The team actually was all together. The CFO comes in the room and he goes, how much money are you looking for? I said, well, we told you, this was going to be between $75,000 and $100,000. And he looked at me and started laughing. And he said, we're in serious trouble, right? How can you come to the table and ask for this? And there wasn't even a discussion. So I was not in the loop further up the line to make sure that my project was still going to go forward. We don't want to have people working on non-value added things. So we're good to go, right? So we start scheduling meet and greets. We find the outsourcing partner or we find the software partner that we want to work with. We look for demos. We ask about delivery capability. Maybe it's a partnership that we're working with. So if I'm looking at an outsourcing partner, I want to know who's going to be working with my team and I want to introduce them and make sure that they'll be comfortable with each other. You want an implementation plan. This is often one of the things that gets overlooked. We sit at the table, we talk about it, somebody takes some meeting notes, we shake hands and everything's great. Well, what is it that we're going to do and when? Take that project plan, put it right in front of that partner that you're going to have and make sure everybody is on the same page. We also want to look into the references. If somebody can't provide you references, you might want to rethink the partnership. Somebody you met at a networking event who handed you a business card and you kind of like them. Yeah, check into it. Make sure you know who you're working with. Make sure they're financially stable. Ask them if there's anything in the hopper over the next, 6 months to a year that they know about that they can share. I was once putting some software in place, and one of the people that was in my top 3, they actually got bought by another company, completely changed the scope of work, completely changed their ability to dedicate resources. So, what's happening with those resources and are they committed to you as an organization? And then, reevaluate them against the criteria. And again, before you sign on the dotted line, is the need still there? Check in with your champion. Make sure you have good team feedback from your stakeholders. Look at the risk again. Double check on that budget, right? Everything's good to go. Sign the agreement, celebrate with your team, and then jump in with both feet, right? So here we go. We've now found our automated partner. We found our outsourcing partner. And now we're going to actually get into the project. So when it comes to what this looks like, when you automate or you outsource, follow-up is really critical. We don't get to take our hands off of it. So when we automate, we know that, right? Because we live it every day. This is our project. We're the key business partner in the process. We're the subject matter expert. When we outsource, though, sometimes we kind of set it and forget it. Do we manage that? What are we doing? Do our stakeholders know how things are going? That first 6 months of going live from an automation project or 6 months from the project with outsourcing, you really want to track things. So we go live. How do my stakeholders feel? Do we still have other things to clean up? When we build a house, it's called a punch list. So what's the punch list? What still needs to be delivered? What hasn't been delivered? What isn't going quite right? We thought the software was going to do this. Not really there. Did it have something to do with our implementation? Or is it a failure on the software's part as a whole? What's happening post-implementation? The customer service piece. Sometimes we automate something and now we're in the customer service center and we really miss our implementation person because they were brilliant, And now we're talking to customer service and they have no idea what they're talking about. Continually assess their performance and be relentless to get what you paid for. We spend a lot of money sometimes when we outsource or we automate. We want to make sure we're getting our value. And then we want to communicate. And I can't stress this enough for you. Please make sure that the people who need to know what's going on actually know what's going on. There's a question in our chat. If you give me just a second, I will pull that up. The question was, what do tactical tasks mean? So I think I might have answered that already, but I'd be happy to answer it again. So tactical tasks are things that are connected with the infrastructure of your organization, and they're kind of the backbone of what we do every day. So they're repeated tasks and things that don't move the strategic plan, but make sure the infrastructure of our organization is solid. Does anyone have any other questions? Oh, you're very welcome. I hope you enjoyed this today. It's been recorded. We'll be posting it out on the website, and we will also be sending you the slides. I hope you found some nugget values here today. Really nice to see you, and I hope you'll be joining our next webinar next month. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Have a great day.